founded a new nation, conceived in liberty and dedicated to the proposition that all men are created equal. Sorry, wrong speech. Wrong speech. Hello everyone, I am Burke. I'm here to talk to you today about reverse engineering, which of certain natural language features in conlang. The majority of people outside this room who even know that conlang exists, who know what we do, probably consider it a waste of time at best. But I come from the artlang tradition, and in my view, an artistic conlang is really no different from any other kind of artistic work. Consider, for example, a fiction writer. What does a fiction writer do? He takes events, experiences, and people that move him, and in some way spins a story around those elements that has some kind of personal meaning for him, and for others, he hopes. What he writes is as much his own personality and temperament as it is what inspires him. Basically, the writer is a center point of a synthesis. You have real external elements coming together with the writer's imagination, thoughts to produce something that didn't exist before, but which comments on, enriches, or illuminates the source materials. The new creation in some way helps him better understand what inspired him in the first place. Conlanging for me is exactly like that. When I was a freshman in college, many years ago, I had the opportunity to take a course in Mohawk, which is an Iroquoian language. And at that point, that was my first introduction to languages that were just completely different from anything that I had seen before. And it intoxicated me. To this day, languages like Mohawk still have a power over me that I can't quite explain it. But they definitely do something for me on an aesthetic and an emotional level. And anyway, I became obsessed with Mohawk at that time, and the way it painted its picture of the world, the way its words and the way that it used them. It showed me ways of thinking that I'd never even considered before. And it eventually led me to dive into other American languages, most notably Cheyenne, which is an Algonquin language. Those two language families, Algonquin and Iroquoian, have been, for me, the twin fountainheads of my work. My work wouldn't exist without them. And I'm here today to show you how I've taken elements of those languages and, as I say, reverse engineered them, to create my language family, which is called the Central Mountain family. One of the key elements that makes a conlang distinct is phonology and phonetic history. The sound of Cheyenne has always been a favorite of mine, more so than Mohawk. When I was first starting out conlanging, I wanted to create a language that captured the spirit of Cheyenne's sound, if not every detail of its phonology. And I studied in depth how Cheyenne sounds and why it sounds that way. It has a very tight set of phonological rules that give it the sound that it does, so that whenever you hear it spoken, you know immediately that it's that. You can recognize it very easily. So what I did was I went back to Cheyenne's ancestor, which is a reconstructed proto-language called Proto-Algonquin, spoken through some 3,000 years ago in North America, and studied studied the evolution of Proto-Algonquin to Cheyenne. Now, those two languages, Proto-Algonquin and Cheyenne, are about as different as languages can be. And I'm going to go through some of the phonetic developments that led from Proto-Algonquin to Cheyenne that I used to create a language of mine called Noyatoa, which is sort of my, I don't want to say it's not a Cheyenne ripoff, it's my, I don't know the quite. Good word, John.
Portrait.
But there are some key phonetic developments that I'm going to go through, and I'm going to show you how I changed them, how I was originally inspired by them, and what they ended up like. I'm going to start with a vowel change shift that occurred from Proto-Algonquin to Cheyenne. Originally, Proto-Algonquin had 4 phonemic vowels, 8 if you count the length distinction. And on the way to Cheyenne, a fairly complicated shift occurred, a change shift whereby E to A to O, O to I. Now, that immediately caused a merger of O and I. So Cheyenne only has 3 vowels instead of the original 4. Now, that looks neat, but there's a kink, actually several kinks, but there's a main kink in this. It has to do with E. Sometimes E doesn't change to A. It's conditioned by the semivowel Y. When E was preceded or followed by Y, it changed to I in Cheyenne. Now, a bit of orthographic information on Cheyenne. Cheyenne is written in the romanization. E is phonetically I. There's a reason for that. Voiceless vowels in Cheyenne are written with dots over them. And of course, I already has a dot, so they used E instead of I, but phonetically it's I. Now, what I did in Noyatoa was take this basic kind of change shift and the kink that I talked about earlier of E sometimes corresponding to I before or after Y. And I did this. Now, it looks more complex, but I'm going to explain. Now, the earliest version of Noyatoa inherited 6 vowels from its ancestors. And I plotted them. Now, if you look, you can see that the direction of change is essentially the same. There, and I have added any number of kinks that are inspired by the one I talked about in Cheyenne, where the E sometimes corresponds to I. For example, E will change to A unless E is preceded by Y. That's taken right from Cheyenne. U will change to E unless U is preceded by W, conditioning by the labial semivowel. And the schwa, will change to E before any palatal consonant, including sh, y, ny, and ny. And otherwise, the schwa will change to A. There's also the centralized A, which again, like the schwa, will change to E before palatal consonants, and will change to U otherwise. Now, as you can see, that's very similar to the Cheyenne shift, the same directions of change in vowel space, but I just added more kinks to it to enliven it a bit. Now, this Cheyenne is a very breathy sounding language. This is largely due to vowel devoicing. There's pervasive vowel devoicing in the language, and it comes about due to the influence of voiceless consonants on preceding vowels. It's a fairly straightforward case of phonetic assimilation. Now, I wanted voiceless vowels in Noyatoa, and I wanted them to follow similar rules to Cheyenne, but instead of any voiceless consonant causing the devoicing, I decided that Cheyenne, Noyatoa's immediate ancestor, which is called Lahulablo, would have a set of contrastive pre-aspirated and non-pre-aspirated stops and fricatives, and that in Noyatoa, the pre-aspiration on these consonants would bleed into the vowels that preceded them and eventually devoice those vowels. So I took the basic Cheyenne process and switched it around a little bit to create the Noyatoa voiceless vowels. Another thing, Cheyenne, unlike Proto-Algonquin, is a tone language. It has distinct high and low pitch to its vowels. That's another feature I wanted to steal from Noyatoa. The reason for this, Proto-Algonquin had phonemic long and short vowels. Now, the long vowels of Proto-Algonquin collapsed or condensed into high-pitched Cheyenne vowels, and the short vowels remained as the low-pitched vowels. I wanted to take that, but that basic process, and I did, but I gave it some different twists. First of all, Noyatoa inherited from its ancestor not 2 contrastive vowel lengths, but 3. So I had the short vowels remain as the low-pitched vowels in Noyatoa. The mid-length vowels became the mid-pitched vowels, and the long vowels became the high pitches. And I made it so that the pitch and the aforementioned devoicing of vowels interact. When a vowel is devoiced, the vowel length pitch correspondence doesn't hold anymore. Instead, all devoiced vowels are underlyingly low-pitched, whether they were originally mid-length or long. Now, another odd feature of Cheyenne is it has a very sparse distribution of P and K. There are very few of those stops remaining in the language. And where they remain is sporadic at best, mostly at morpheme boundaries. When I was doing Noyatoa, I wanted the same kind of sparse distribution, but a few more. So what I did was I took the irregular way that Cheyenne lost P and K and imposed some rules on it. Those rules are that P and K drop in all positions except when they are the first member of certain consonant clusters, and morpheme finally, which recalls the Cheyenne retention of P and K at morpheme boundaries. Now, moving away from Cheyenne, we're going to go to Mohawk, which was the first American Indian language I ever encountered, as I said. Most of my conlangs, with only a couple of exceptions, completely lack morphological or formal nouns. References to actions or things or even qualities are all expressed with verbs. For my doing that, Mohawk is largely to blame, because Mohawk, a lot of what you might call syntactic nouns in Mohawk are really verbs. And they use these verbs to refer to any number of things. Now I'm going to show you some Mohawk examples of what you might call syntactic nouns that are actually verbs. That is pronounced galletegelas, which translates as its body stinks, or it has a stinky body, or goat. Another one is deu squalo, which is its teeth stick out. Cow. This one is laselunya. He makes axes, or axe maker, which is the word for white man. Now, that Mohawk has a somewhat limited set of formal nouns. But what I did with the Central Mountain family is I took this way of referring to things and I took it to an extreme. I had no formal nouns whatsoever. Every time anything is referred to, it's referred to with a verb in that kind of a style. A descriptive verb, usually marking some peculiar quality of whatever's being described, its key function, what importance it might have in the culture, etc. Now I'm going to show you some examples from my own work. This is from Proto-Central Mountain, which is the earliest form of my conlang family. Now, I don't speak Proto-Central Mountain, but I'm going to do my best to, pronounce these because I don't, talk it out loud very often. Okikmiya, he rides upon the wind, translates as eagle. It's kind of an obvious one, but it's in the style of the others. This one, Sekinona Hitoma, he lengthens my arm, referring to a spear or a lance. The idea that, it goes back to the idea that, one's arms and one's hands, that's a means of defense. And that the spear or a lance is, an adjunct to that. Now this one is not immediately obvious. Hohekashinoma, he falls from the sky, iron. Now, exactly, iron meteorites. Because what's true in real history is that probably a lot of during the early Iron Age, a lot of the iron that was turned into tools and implements and weapons probably did come from iron meteorites. That was how it was first discovered. Now, this one, Otsosis Mamatasi. They dwell far. This is a word that refers to the gods of my con world, which is called Azaria. The word comes down into Noyatowa as Ozotacho. And I'm going to show you all the steps of how it gets to that from that, but it does. They are, I always imagine them as the prototypes of animals. They have animal forms, very giant animals, as you might, if you're familiar with Algonquin legend. They were in the con world, when animals were created, they were created in the mold of these beings. And these beings in turn created the earth, man, etc. Now, these two, So Hushamame is the name of one of the aforementioned gods. And his name translates as he charges madly, or with rage, with fury. He has a brother. His form is a giant grizzly bear. Which eventually, without the ending, turns in later into the word for grizzly bear. He has a brother. He plays with cunning. The two words describe their ways of playing the game lacrosse, or if you're familiar with the Indian term, the Ojibwe term, Bagatawe. These two beings, these two grizzly bear brothers, invented the game, and human beings named them based on their playing style. And in this case, eventually his name became the word for grizzly bear, but the other one, he actually dies fairly early on in mythology, so he doesn't get any animals named after him. Okay, moving along. Mohawk and Cheyenne both were an inspiration for me in the development of an animacy distinction in my Central Mountain family, which occurs in the third person. It's usually stated as a form of gender, but the Algonquin idea of animacy is very difficult for a lot of Westerners to get, because if you look at the lists of words, what connects them isn't immediately obvious. But actually what it is it has to do with spiritual power or function. Animate things are those things that are religiously important in the culture, or that have served some kind of ritual function in the past or in the present. And that holds true for the vast majority of animate versus inanimate things. And of course, inanimate things being those that don't have much, spiritual power or function. Now, Iroquois is more familiar, Mohawk. It has a gender system including masculine, feminine, neuter, and a fourth called the indefinite, which is used for references of an unknown type to an unknown subject or object. It can be translated as someone, a person, one, or even you, depending on the context. Now, what I did with the Central Mountain languages was I took the evolution of the Iroquois gender system and turned it into the evolution of, the origin and evolution of an animacy system in Central Mountain. I'm going to explain the evolution of the Iroquois system. We begin in Proto-Iroquois, where in the third person we had an indefinite versus specific distinction. Now that's more or less similar to definite and indefinite articles. Something that you already know versus something that you don't, or something familiar with something unknown. And that existed at the earliest stage of Proto-Iroquois and as reconstructed. Now, on the road from Proto-Iroquois to Proto-Northern Iroquois, which is the most recent ancestor of the Northern Iroquois languages, Mohawk, Seneca, Oneida, Tuscarora, Onondaga, there was a change. What happened, there was an introduction of masculinity. Masculine specific, to be exact. It was introduced in that paradigm only. And at the same time as that happened, or shortly after, no one's sure, the indefinite began to be used to refer to feminine things as a counterpart to the masculine. Eventually, a split occurred where you have masculine, specific, and specific without masculine, and feminine on this side. Now, from Proto-Northern Iroquois to Mohawk, it gets more complicated. The masculine goes straight into Mohawk as masculine, but it loses the specificity. It's no longer refers to a masculine specific thing, just masculine. It splits. It splits into, it becomes essentially a neuter category. And because the indefinite over here had been used to refer to feminine things earlier, the indefinite became a split category, feminine indefinite. And when this happened, feminine, there was some cross-pollination between the two, and they began to have a feminine neuter category. Iroquoian gender is very difficult to tease apart. This is the theory that I buy into. There are several, but this is the one that I like the best, that I think explains the way that it works. If you look in the program, you will see a whole list of pronominal prefixes in Mohawk. Those show you. You can look in the paradigms and see the splits. There's a masculine category followed by their feminine neuter, feminine indefinite. They fall together in a lot of the paradigms. And after the prefixes, you can see a list of the pronominal elements that make up each prefix. Now, some of the prefixes have to some degree fused to the point that you can't tease them apart. But if you look at the elements, you can see how they're constructed and how the categories fell together. Now, I took this system, which is basically what happened is you have an innovation, an introduction of some outside material which causes a ripple effect across the whole of the system. And I turned it into this. It's a little bit more complicated. This is the original pronoun system of Proto-Central Mountain. Originally, the second person isn't involved in this, so there's just first and third. There was originally, in all the persons, there were 4 numbers. The singular, the plural, the partitive plural, and the aggregated plural. Now the latter two, the partitive plural, of course, that's a borrowing, of course, from Tolkien's languages, which I like that number to refer to some things out of a larger group. But the last one, aggregative, that's for all of something, everything. All X, whatever, all oranges, all apples, all peaches. And this number distinction existed across all the paradigms. Now in the third person, I started out, as in Iroquois, with a specific, non-specific distinction. Which, Iroquois is specific and indefinite. Specific and non-specific are a little bit different, but generally in the same direction. And they originally had 4 numbers for each category. In the first person, eventually what happened is that the singular went into the later system just